Chapter 963. Godotzi grabbed Merlin's neck and made a sound full of surprise. Let go. It's broken. It's going to break. Merlin rolled his eyes. For some reason, Godotzi's excitement made him so strong that Merlin, a servant, could not break free. Godotzi, who realized the problem, immediately let go of Merlin and apologized shyly. Sorry. Cough, cough, cough. Merlin, who was lying on the ground, touched his chest and couldn't help but sigh. I'm saved. Merlin, don't change the topic. Anna said while putting Harpa's scythe under Merlin's neck. Calm down, Anna. Are you going to kill me? Merlin was so scared that he didn't dare to move. This immortal slaughtering blade had a special effect on immortal creatures. Although Merlin had relied on half of the dream demon bloodline to survive, he did not want to gamble on whether he was considered an immortal creature or not. Whether the scythe would have any effect on him. He did not want to take the risk at all. He did not want to suffer such a blow. Merlin was very afraid of pain. Even when he bit his tongue while chanting, he would feel pain for a while. I can now cut you down as if you're in cahoots with the demonic beasts. What else do you want to say? Anna's small and cold voice was a little bit cold. Looking at Anna's eyes that were filled with coldness, Merlin could feel that if he did not explain himself clearly, Anna would really slash him with a knife. After all, Anna wanted to cut Merlin for a while, so she could take this opportunity to get rid of him. All of this is my own speculation. I extracted some information from one of the commanders of the demons, Eulidim. In addition, Quizzer, who is also a member of the Three Goddesses Alliance with Gorgon, told me something. That's why I was able to speculate. In order to prevent people from not understanding, Merlin explained in detail. After all, the plan made by the demonic beast commanders is not a top-secret plan. As long as you know that the demonic beasts will attack the Uruk from different places, then this plan will become an easy-to-understand open conspiracy. Merlin raised his hands and kept a surrendering look. Anna, can you move this away from my neck? Merlin looked at Anna with a smile and moved Harpa's scythe with his hand. You escaped, Anna said and took back the scythe from Merlin's neck. When Merlin finally calmed down, Godotzi discovered something. Wait a minute, Merlin, in other words, Assassin also knows? After all, Wuming was the one who killed Eulidim. Since Merlin could extract information from Eulidim, there was no reason that Wuming didn't know about it. Yes, that's it. Merlin patted his sleeves and put his hand on his forehead to observe. The sound wave has almost stopped, let's go. Merlin finished and strode forward. Wait a minute. Merlin, why didn't Assassin and you tell us such important information earlier? Godotzi, who quickly followed Merlin, asked Merlin loudly. Varen Senpai's words probably have his own reasons. Mashu, who had put away her shield, walked to Godotzi's side and said her opinion. That's right. After all, the number of demonic beasts commanders has changed, so the demonic beasts plan will inevitably change. Villo just reserved his opinion. But Merlin, it must be because of his bad taste. Anna followed behind the three and looked at Merlin with disdain. That's too much, Anna. But Anna answered Merlin seriously. Go to hell, Merlin. Yes. Matthew, who couldn't stand it anymore, interrupted the conversation between the two. That the battlefield is in front, is it really okay to be so casual? Forget it, Matthew, don't worry about Merlin. After all, Godotzi and the others already knew about Merlin's indecent behavior. Yes, Senior. But, I don't know how Assassin and the North Wall are doing now, I'm so worried. Miss Godotzi, who was distracted after saying that Merlin was indecent. At that moment, Matthew could only remain silent, but that feeling of helplessness filled Matthew's face. This way there really isn't a problem, right? Outside the North Wall, in the sky above Nippur City, Wuming silently looked at the ray that deflected his noble phantasm's attack, and his face turned pale. Before his Yggdrasil hit Nippur City, it was deflected by the rays released by a few giant snake heads that suddenly emerged from the hills of Nippur City. As a result, Yggdrasil only hit half of Nippur City, and half of the demonic beasts seemed to have received an order to gather on the other half of Nippur City. This caused basically no demonic beasts to be killed by this noble phantasm. Yggdrasil landed on the ground and caused a huge explosion. The smoke was dispersed by the natural wind towards the other half of Nippur city. And the dispersed Nippur city was full of mystery. He grabbed Yggdrasil, who had automatically flown back from the ground, and with a swing of his spear, he put Yggdrasil back into his dragoness space. This is not good, Kalas. How are your preparations going? I still need some time, master. Hearing Kalas's words, Wuming gave up on a certain idea. If that's the case, let me think of a way to get through this by myself. The difficulty that Wuming was talking about was the few huge snakeheads that had shot Yggdrasil's ray that deviated from its course. Wuming had seen those snakeheads before. They were formed by Gorgon's hair. Wuming had been in close contact with Gorgon last time, so he definitely would not be mistaken. Hey! An ethereal voice like that of a god echoed in the sky as if it came from all directions. Wuming clearly recognized that the voice came from Nippur city below. It was just that the other party had used magic to make the voice sound like it came from all directions. However, Wuming was very confused about the voice. From the sound of it, it seemed to be Gorgon's voice, but Gorgon would not make such meaningless shouts. Gorgon, just half a year shouldn't be enough for you to recover from your injuries. After all, Gorgon said that she would not step out of her blood shrine until she recovered from her injuries. Wuming was also very clear that even if Gorgon had the Holy Grail, it was impossible for her to recover from her injuries in such a short period of time. This was because the injuries that Wuming inflicted on Gorgon were caused by his origin force. For Gorgon, who had the origin black soil, Wuming's attack went deep into his bones. The magic provided by the Holy Grail that Gydia created was not enough to heal him. If that was the case, why did Gorgon come here? Why did he make that song-like sound? Chapter 964. Gorgon wouldn't lie to herself. Even if she was a magical creature, she wouldn't go back on her words. It should be said that it was because she was a magical creature that she wouldn't go back on her words. In the stories of people and things outside of humans, the ones who would go back on their words were usually the humans, which was quite ironic. Moreover, Gorgon had now inherited Tiamat's authority. She was now the goddess of magical beasts, and this identity wouldn't allow Gorgon to go back on her words. This had already escalated to a matter of dignity. What's the matter? We've had a deathmatch before. Aren't you prepared to come out and meet this old friend of yours? However, Gorgon didn't react at all, as if she didn't hear him. In that case, Wuming said and raised a hand. For victory, come to me quickly. Undying sun, please bestow upon me a shining steed. Horses with enough intelligence, bring me the light wheel that symbolizes your master. Wuming immediately used his authority, the incarnation of the sun. A scorching fireball suddenly appeared on Wuming's palm, then suddenly expanded. The originally palm-sized fireball instantly became dozens of times larger, and the massive magic power it emitted made one wonder if there was a holy grail stuffed inside. At that moment, Wuming, who was holding the sun, also appeared rather small. Since you're not coming out, then let me invite you out? Wuming exerted strength from his waist, and the hand holding the sun instantly swung downward. The sun in that hand was controlled by Wuming's telekinesis, and fell to the ground extremely slowly. Why did he have to land slowly? Because Wuming wanted to see how these magical beasts would meet their end. Tsk. Like a heavenly fire descending to the world, the bizarre temperature of the sun scorched the ground, causing it to dry up and crack open. Even the magical beasts directly collapsed to the ground, emitting an unknown gas all over their bodies. Their bodies gradually shriveled and burned, and they couldn't be more dead. Paralysis was due to the high temperature. The unknown gas was due to the aroma of meat emitted by the high temperature. The shriveled body was due to the evaporation of the moisture in the body by Wuming's sun. The burning was due to the extremely dry fur spontaneously combusting in the extreme heat. Even the smoke caused by Yggdrasil's explosion was quickly disappearing. Gradually, the city that was dyed red by the high temperature and began to burn gradually revealed itself. Because there were no longer any human beings in Nippur, and there were no signs of human habitation nearby, Wuming infused the incarnation of the sun with a lot of magic power. When there was no one around and he did not care about the gains and losses, Wuming could totally unleash his ultimate move, just like what he did to Yulitim back then. This was also the reason why Wuming wanted to come alone. In an instant, the entire city of Nippur became a city of flames. This reminded Wuming of the burning city of Winter, Wood where he met Gadatsi and the rest. The smoke disappeared completely. Apart from the flames, there was nothing else in the entire city of Nippur. Gorgon was also nowhere to be seen, leaving only a few holes on the ground. It was obvious that Gorgon had only revealed his head that was full of snake heads, and his real body was still underground. Since you don't want to come out, then I don't have to worry about it. Wuming snorted and removed the control of the sun incarnation. Suddenly, the entire sun incarnation turned into a meteor that was about to fall to the ground. In the next second, the meteor fell, and Nippur finally fulfilled Wuming's wish and exploded. Boom! Flames completely covered Nippur, and the city that was originally built on hills was now completely flattened. Much of the land had even turned into magma, due to the high temperature. The loud explosion carried a strong penetrating force as though it could penetrate one's ears. However, Wuming, who was in the range of the explosion, did not even blink. He silently looked at the completely transformed Nippur that was covered in flames and magma. Although his sun incarnation was indeed powerful enough to be used as a trump card, Wuming did not think that Gorgon would die under this move. Otherwise, Gorgon would be too easy to deal with. As expected, Gorgon's strange screams came from the magma and flames again. However, as though it was a counterattack, the screams this time were filled with magic. The magma exploded, the flames were extinguished, and thick smoke billowed into the air. You're out. Wuming calmed himself down. However, in the next second, several silver-white chains rushed out from the thick smoke. Clang! Several chains with silver wedges at the end swept toward Wuming at a speed faster than the naked eye could see. However, these silver-white chains were greeted by silver-white chains with specks of gold. Clang 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 clang. The ends of the chains with specks of gold also had wedges in the same shape as the silver chains. The wedges collided directly with the wedges, and a crisp sound was transmitted from the wedges to the chains for a long time. These chains with specks of gold extended from Wuming's arm. Wuming's arm that originally had nothing on it was now wrapped with a golden chain. At the same time, golden ripples appeared around Wuming, and several golden chains extended from it, including the one on Wuming's arm. The number of golden chains was exactly the same as the silver-white chains that attacked him. The silver-white chains paused in the air for a moment, as though their users were stunned. Then several silver-white chains turned into golden particles and dissipated, as though they were abandoned after being used up. This was quite similar to Gilgamesh's fighting style. At the same time, the chains that extended from the golden ripples around Wuming were also retracted. Whether it was Enkidu's automatic attack or the golden ripples around Wuming, they were all Enkidu's own ideas. Wuming didn't interfere at all. Enkidu, are you okay? Wuming, who had already guessed who attacked him with the chains, was rather worried about Enkidu. After all, in a sense, Enkidu was fighting with him just now. That's right, the silver-white chains that attacked Wuming just now were the fake ones that Wuming saw when he left the arena last time. The fake Enkidu who stole Enkidu's body. Clang clang clang. Enkidu didn't say anything. Instead, the chain that represented her gently touched Wuming's cheek, as if to say that she was fine, or as if to comfort Wuming. Enkidu knew that fighting with someone who stole her body was the last thing that Wuming wanted to see, because, even if only the body was Enkidu, it was still Enkidu. Chapter 965. Don't worry about me. Although I'll show mercy to the person using your body, I won't put myself in danger. Moreover, then Wuming looked down at the place where the chain had come out from. I'm afraid the opponent won't hurt me. First of all, the real purpose of the chain wasn't to pierce the enemy, but to bind the enemy. This was a very important point. Of course, piercing the enemy was also possible, but Wuming didn't think that he would be pierced. In order to prove this point, Wuming didn't move at all. He didn't defend, counterattack, or even dodge. Wuming wanted to see if the chain would bind him. Wuming bet that there was a 99% chance that the chain would bind him instead of piercing him. As for why Wuming felt that nothing would happen to him, and why was he so confident that the opponent wouldn't hurt him, That was because even if the opponent wasn't Enkidu on the inside, the body was still Enkidu. Wuming believed that as long as it was Enkidu, the opponent wouldn't hurt him. Why was Wuming so sure? There had to be some evidence, right? Last time, when Wuming was forced to leave, the fake Enkidu had developed feelings for Wuming. Wuming wasn't a block of wood, and he wasn't someone who couldn't see the details. That was why Wuming had seen everything clearly. It seemed like the opponent's body was affected by using Enkidu, which was why he developed feelings for Wuming. However, it was up to the opponent to decide what would happen. That was why Wuming wanted to do an experiment to see what the fake Enkidu would do to him. In the end, perhaps because he saw himself attacking Wuming, Enkidu couldn't hold back and attacked, which disrupted Wuming's plan. You should at least believe in yourself. After all, that's your body. I don't think the other party will do anything to me. After hearing Wuming's words, Enkidu's chain drooped down, as if he was sad to be lectured by Wuming. Alright, I'm not blaming you. Be good. Enkidu gently stroked the chain and regained his vitality. After that, Enkidu once again wrapped around Wuming's body, but this time, he didn't conceal himself. Enkidu also knew that Kalis was busy, so he let her assist Wuming. The heavenly lock that had undergone an extraordinary transformation was the best weapon against deities. It's about time. Wuming was naturally referring to Gorgon. In the thick smoke below, Enkidu was half kneeling on the scorched ground with one hand covering his head, and the other supporting his body on the ground. It was obvious that he was greatly traumatized. That's the real Enkidu, Enkidu said with a trembling voice, as if he was affected by the short exchange with the real Enkidu. A voice covered in magic came from the ground, and the ground covered in smoke started to crack, as if something was about to come out. So he subconsciously counterattacked because of the other party's attack. Enkidu frowned as he thought of something. Then let him cause a scene. Enkidu stood up and tried to look at Wuming through the smoke, but the magic in the smoke made Enkidu's vision quite blurry. Ugh. Enkidu couldn't help but let out a muffled groan. After confirming that there was something wrong with him, Enkidu decided to leave this place. The demonic beasts here have been wiped out. He was ready to go to other places to gather the demonic beasts and attack the north wall together with the commander. As for Wu Ming, he would leave it to her to deal with him. At this moment, from Wu Ming's perspective, a green-haired figure in white suddenly came out of the smoke and flew towards the north wall. Trying to run? Although his plan didn't come to fruition, the fact that the guy using Enkidu's body was able to escape proved that his plan was partially correct. At the very least, he could tell that the other party really didn't want to attack Wu Ming. But how could Wu Ming just watch Enkidu leave? Immediately, Wu Ming increased his telekinesis to control his body and tried to follow Enkidu. However, an attack came out of the smoke. A black ray of destruction was shot out. Luckily, Wu Ming stopped in time, or else he would have been hit. It's different from the previous ray. The purple ray that stopped Wu Ming's sun transformation was different. This time, the black ray made Wu Ming feel very dangerous. It's the ray of the demon eye of petrification. Last time when Wu Ming fought with Gorgon, Gorgon's magic eye of petrification was ineffective against Wu Ming after he revealed his true form. Now Wu Ming's spiritual base wasn't as strong as it was when he revealed his true form. If he was hit by this ray of petrification, he would gradually turn into stone, but the speed would be as slow as a curse. Moreover, the ray shot out by Gorgon's magic eye of petrification not only had the effect of petrification, but it also had a great destructive power, just like the purple ray that Gorgon used before. The purple ray that was formed by pure magic had the power to shift Wu Ming's sun transformation. Although it didn't seem like a big deal, Wu Ming was very clear about it. After all, it was his own incarnation that was shifted. In Wu Ming's view, the sun incarnation that was in free fall wouldn't be shifted so easily. Gorgon used the purple ray to destroy a corner of the sun incarnation, causing the sun incarnation to shift in an unbalanced state. Obviously, Gorgon's ray had a very powerful destructive power. Otherwise it would be impossible to destroy Wu Ming's attack. The magic eye of petrification just now was even more so. Through the petrification ray, Wu Ming could feel that if Wu Ming was hit, he would probably be knocked away. It didn't seem to be anything special, But that was only for Wuming. If a human was hit by that attack, they probably wouldn't even be petrified and would be completely destroyed. Really, you don't show up when you should, but show up when you shouldn't. Before, Gorgon was provoked by Wuming and didn't show up, but when Wuming was ready to chase Enkidu, she showed up again. Then, you and I will take advantage of this to decide the winner. After saying that, Wuming waved his hand, and several phalanxes appeared behind Wuming. It was the Manchala phalanx. Immediately afterward, the Manchala phalanx condensed and turned into a holy sword that looked very much like the Excalibur. This was the Divine Sword of Salvation. The Divine Sword of Salvation that was specially used to kill the Demon King. Today let me see if my Divine Sword of Salvation can kill you, Gorgon. Chapter 966. What responded to Wuming was Gorgon's strange cry again. After hearing it a few times, Wuming even felt an inexplicable sense of familiarity. Not only that, but several black petrification rays with a diameter of a few meters were also ejected from the thick fog. Wuming raised the Savior Divine Blade high. Lightning flashed on the blade of the Savior Divine Blade, and it emitted a rather strange pale light. Clang! The sound of a sword being unsheathed came from the Savior Divine Blade. Then, Wuming slashed the Savior Divine Blade at the incoming petrification rays. Countless lightning bolts collided with Gorgon's petrification rays, and cut them vertically from the middle like a hot knife cutting through butter. After that, the power of the lightning bolts from the Savior Divine Blade did not weaken at all, and rushed toward Gorgon in the thick fog. Chi! The thick fog was instantly split apart by the lightning bolts from the Savior Divine Blade, and spread to both sides. The lightning bolts from the Savior Divine Blade finally slashed at Gorgon's tail. Although the Savior Divine Blade's attack had power left after cutting through Gorgon's petrification rays, it was not enough to cause fatal damage to Gorgon. Gorgon used his thick and tough tail to block the attack from Wuming's Savior Divine Blade. Gorgon's tail was torn open. The power of the lightning bolts made Gorgon's cracked tail look like roasted meat. Wuming even saw that part of Gorgon's wound was similar to cooked meat. Wuming even wondered if he could smell the fragrance of meat if he was close enough. But then Wuming had a trace of doubt. Gorgon's wound had not healed. This was impossible for Gorgon, who had Tiamat's authority. Tiamat's authority would allow Gorgon to recover quickly. Last time, Gorgon did not recover because Wuming's injury was caused by a trace of black mud in Gorgon's body. That was why he could not recover. But now, Gorgon did not have the slightest trace of the black mud in his body. Even if the Savior Divine Blade had a trace of origin power, this should not be the result. Then Wuming noticed something wrong again. Wait! What's that? A pair of huge and curved horns grew on Gorgon's head. Gorgon's tail could block Gorgon's body and face, but it could not block the horns. Gorgon slowly lowered his tail, causing the air to tremble. Because the thick fog had completely disappeared, a new Gorgon appeared in front of Wuming. He still had the upper body of a woman and the lower body of a snake. His entire body was covered in purplish-black scales. A pair of angelic wings with golden feathers curled up behind his back. Countless long purple hair turned into giant purple snakes that swaggered around Gorgon. It could be said that apart from the addition of the huge pair of curled horns on Gorgon's head, Gorgon did not change at all. Gorgon's eyes were still the same square petrified eyes, but his eyes seemed to have lost their light as if he had lost his self-consciousness. Gorgon raised his head and looked at Wuming with his lifeless eyes. Then he slowly opened his mouth, revealing a mouthful of thin but sharp fangs. The special sound from before came out of Gorgon's mouth again, and the effect was more obvious than before. The sound, which was stronger than the sound wave, spread out in a manner visible to the naked eye with Gorgon as the center. Everything that was affected was crushed and flattened. The city of Nippur, which was originally filled with charred ground and dark ruins, was instantly razed to the ground. It even went a few meters underground. Wuming could even see the dark underground passage where Gorgon was hiding. However, the sound wave did not diminish and continued to spread to the surroundings. The grassy land and specially opened roads outside Nippur instantly disappeared, probably because the sound wave had weakened. The land was not dug up like in Nippur. However, it was not much better because after the sound wave, Only bare land was left. Wuming, who was flying in the sky, was also affected. The sound wave made him take a few steps back. Wuming put down the arm in front of him that was used to block the sound wave, then comforted the restless Enkidu. He looked at Gorgon with a serious expression. This guy was no longer Gorgon. Wuming knew this very well. This guy is Tiamat. When Wuming said this, Enkidu's heaven lock became even more restless, as if he agreed with Wuming's words. Wuming had indeed never seen Tiamat. After all, when Wuming came to the Mesopotamia and Uruk, Tiamat had already been divided into heaven and earth by the gods of the Sumer and banished to the void dimension. Therefore, Wuming did not have the opportunity to see Tiamat. However, Wuming had once entered the mirror world to retrieve his class card, and entering the mirror world required passing through the void dimension. Coincidentally, at the last time, in order to retrieve Gilgamesh's class card, Wuming, Elia, Mayu, Bazet, and the others entered the mirror world together. When passing through the void dimension, Wuming inadvertently heard a voice that sounded like a poignant but beautiful song. Moreover, when Wuming returned to the Mesopotamia last time, he also dreamed of Tiamat when he was sleeping by the roadside in the south. At that time, the voice in his dream was the same as the one he heard when passing through the void dimension. They were both poignant but beautiful songs. Now that he thought about it carefully, if he ignored Gorgon's mature voice, the voice that Gorgon was making at this moment could be said to be exactly the same as Tiamat's voice. So the current Gorgon was actually Tiamat, the true goddess of the monsters. The only change that happened to Gorgon's body could prove this point. The huge pair of twisted horns on his head was obviously not something that Gorgon could have. There were no rumors in Greek mythology of monsters with such strange horns that could petrify people. There were no such records in the adapted stories or the orthodox myths. The only difference between Gorgon at this singularity was that he had accepted Tiamat's authority. Obviously, the current Gorgon had indeed been assimilated by Tiamat. No wonder you can reproduce monster commanders that are several times stronger than servants. Wuming now understood how the strengthening type monsters and monster commanders came about. About 3 months ago, or even earlier, Gorgon, who was recuperating in the blood shrine and possessed Tiamat's authority, was assimilated by Tiamat's authority for some reasons that Wuming did not know. Chapter 967. Although there was only a slight difference in her appearance, she had been completely assimilated by Tiamat. It wouldn't be wrong to say that she was Tiamat now. The pair of huge and twisted horns were undoubtedly part of Tiamat's body, which was rumored to have a dragon's body. Moreover, looking at Gorgon's lifeless eyes, Wuming wasn't sure if he had completely lost his self-awareness. At least, that was what Wuming thought. At this moment, Gorgon didn't have the aura of an avenger. Instead, he was filled with motherly instincts, like a mother who overly spoiled her child. Wuming guessed that this assimilation probably occurred 3 months ago, or even earlier. After that, Gorgon, who was assimilated by Tiamat, produced 10 powerful magical beast commanders. Together with the fake Enkidu, they formed a lineup of 11 magical beast commanders, which symbolized the 11 sons of Tiamat. But what puzzled Wuming was, what exactly caused Gorgon to be assimilated by Tiamat's authority? When Gorgon used Tiamat's authority to fight against Wuming, Wuming didn't see anything wrong with it. Gorgon looked as if he was completely in control of Tiamat's authority. Could it be that Gorgon's control over Tiamat's authority weakened after fighting with Wuming, which caused Gorgon to be assimilated by Tiamat's authority? Or was there some other reason, such as the unknown person who used Enkidu's body? No matter what, Gorgon is no longer Gorgon but Tiamat. However, there was still one thing that Wuming was puzzled about. Gorgon's injuries hadn't healed on their own. Wuming slashed at Gorgon with the blade of salvation, but Gorgon blocked it with its tail. Naturally, there was a crack on its tail, and it had not recovered yet. In fact, there was no sign of recovery at all. This was very strange. Even if I'm assimilated, I shouldn't be unable to use authority, right? Wuming wondered. The assimilated Gorgon did not mean that he was no longer Gorgon. It was just that Tiamat was added to the foundation of Gorgon. Gorgon's consciousness was suppressed or disappeared because he could not defeat Tiamat. The one controlling Gorgon's body was probably Tiamat. However, this body's abilities shouldn't have disappeared, so why didn't the wound on Gorgon's tail heal? Wu-Ming had no idea what was going on. Then, Wu-Ming looked in the direction where the fake Enkidu left. That guy should know what's going on. Unfortunately, that guy escaped, and Wu-Ming was now entangled with Gorgon, who was controlled by Tiamat. So he couldn't chase after him and ask for an explanation. However, Wu-Ming didn't have time to think about it, because Gorgon, who was controlled by Tiamat, started attacking again. As Gorgon sang, several dark purple magic circles appeared in front of Gorgon's head, or more accurately, in front of Gorgon's eyes. Then, a black ray of light shot out from the magic circles towards Wu-Ming. Not only that, but the snake heads formed by Gorgon's hair were also brewing and shooting out the same black ray from time to time. Although these rays were not as big as the black ray of light, Wu-Ming knew very well that these rays were petrification rays that could petrify people. Whoosh! Wu-Ming's rapid movement caused the atmosphere to tremble. Wu-Ming danced in the black ray of light and flew towards Gorgon below. Wu-Ming used the Sword of Salvation to block the black ray from time to time, cut it from time to time, and dodge it from time to time. Gorgon's petrification rays did not affect Wu-Ming at all. Since there was no time for Wu-Ming to think, Wu-Ming decided not to think. Isn't Gorgon unable to heal himself? So let's cut Gorgon first before we talk about it. Wu-Ming approached Gorgon bit by bit. Gorgon's countless snake heads attacked Wu-Ming like giant pythons that could eat a person in one bite. In the next second, Wu-Ming's celestial lock extended, split, and lengthened, piercing or binding the snake heads. Enkidu, who had the property of restraining gods, was very effective against Gorgon's hair. Wu-Ming, on the other hand, moved towards Gorgon's head step by step along the snake heads. Wu-Ming used the martial arts engraved in his bones to cut Gorgon's snake heads up and down. Countless purple blood-like liquid flowed out of the snake heads. While dodging the purple blood, Wu-Ming also paid attention to the petrification rays that were shot at him from time to time. After all, not all of the snake heads were biting Wu-Ming. Many of them were charging up power to release petrification rays from afar. However, these petrification rays were either blocked by Wu-Ming's Sword of Salvation or dodged sideways. As a result, Gorgon could not catch or stop Wu-Ming at all. It could only watch as Wu-Ming approached it bit by bit. However, it was fortunate that the snake heads killed by Wu-Ming were in a state where they could not be restored, just like Gorgon. Otherwise, Wu-Ming would have a much harder time moving forward. The obstruction brought by the snake heads that could be restored infinitely, and the obstruction brought by the snake heads that could not be restored were two different levels. After all, if it was the latter, the number of snake heads obstructing Wu-Ming would gradually decrease. But even if it was the former, Wu-Ming was not afraid at all. After all, he was a warrior trained by the Queen of the Country of Shadows, Skaha. Not only did he not drop his guard against the snake heads around him, but he also swam through the sea of snake heads with ease. If Miyazasobo Benkei and Nuwakamaru saw this, they would definitely be full of praise for Wu-Ming's skills. Wu-Ming's martial arts were basically shelved because of Wu-Ming's fighting style, but this did not mean that Wu-Ming forgot the martial arts he learned, or that Wu-Ming did not know how to use them. How could he forget the martial arts he was trained by the Queen of the Country of Shadows, Skaha? Even now, Wu-Ming's body still trembled slightly when he recalled the experience of being trained by Skaha. It could only be said that not being a human played a big role. If he was an ordinary person, he would probably die in the middle of the training. Although Wu-Ming persevered, the hardships he went through were not enough to let others know. Cough cough. Wu-Ming took advantage of the fact that Gorgon could not stop him and sped up. Because he maintained his human form, Wu-Ming was quite small compared to Gorgon. The closer he got to Gorgon by Wu-Ming, the greater the contrast between him and Gorgon. Probably a little panicked because he could not stop Wu-Ming from advancing too quickly. Gorgon made a strange sound again. This time, the sound was full of unwillingness. However, Wu-Ming did not care whether Gorgon was willing or not. Even if Wu-Ming's eyes were fixed on Gorgon's eyes, because Gorgon's eyes were already in a lifeless state, Wu-Ming could not see anything. As for why Wu-Ming paid attention to Gorgon's eyes, it was because Wu-Ming wanted to attack Gorgon's eyes. After all, no matter the reason, it was true that Gorgon could not heal himself at the moment. Whether it was Gorgon's tail or Gorgon's snake hair, they all prove this. Therefore, Wu Ming planned to destroy Gorgon's demonic eyes of petrification first before thinking about other things. If Gorgon lost the demonic eyes of petrification, it could be said that Gorgon was a tiger without its teeth and claws. At best, it would only be a slightly bigger monster. There was nothing to be afraid of. Of course, the premise was that Gorgon had no other abilities after being assimilated by Tiamat's authority. However, Wu Ming did not know what exactly happened to Gorgon, nor did he know if the current Gorgon had any other abilities that Wu Ming did not know of. After all, the conclusion that Gorgon has been assimilated by Tiamat's authority was only Wu Ming's guess, although it was very likely to be the case. However, a guess was just a guess. It could only be used as backup information. Wu Ming lacked accurate information. Therefore, Wu Ming was taking a gamble. Or rather, he could only take a gamble. Bzzz, Wu Ming, who was getting closer and closer to Gorgon, held the sword of salvation that was emitting a trace of electric light. That was the sign that the sword of salvation was accumulating the thunder of salvation. In the world of the deicide, the sword of salvation was a weapon specially created by the gods for Rama to slay the demon king. Not only was it the materialization of the Manchala formation that stored the gods' weapons, but it was also the embodiment of the weapon that slayed the demon king in Rama's story, the indestructible blade. Because Rama, as a hero, was the existence that dealt with the demon king, and Rama himself had the legend of slaying the demon king, Rabona. The thunder of salvation that filled the sword of salvation was also a special attack against demons. Whether it was the demon king or monster, as long as there was demon in it, it would be included in the special attack range of the thunder of salvation. Gorgon's petrification ray undoubtedly had demon in it. The reason why it could easily split apart Gorgon's petrification ray was because of this special effect. This point was very similar to Rama's weapon, the indestructible blade. His weapon also had a special effect against demon. It could only be said that no matter which world Rama was from, there was indeed a similarity. And Wu Ming was going to use this thunder of salvation against the demonic nature to destroy Gorgon's demonic eye and make it half crippled. Looking at Gorgon's head that was only a few dozen meters away, Wu Ming suddenly jumped away from the snake hair that served as a runway to approach Gorgon. The distance of only a few dozen meters was a very close distance for Wu Ming, or for any servant, so Wu Ming directly jumped up and no longer used the snake hair as a runway to approach Gorgon. The snake hair that was used as a runway by Wu Ming directly exploded the moment Wu Ming jumped up. It was as if it was kicked by the powerful energy generated by Wu Ming's kick. This was enough to show how powerful Wu Ming was. Wu Ming, who was flying in the air, looked like he had lost his footing. This made the snake hair in the distance close in, ready to directly bite Wu Ming to death. However, Enkidu once again showed his power. Countless heavenly locks shot out from Wu Ming's body and pierced the snake heads on the snake hair. Not only did it prevent the snake hair from interfering with Wu Ming's actions, but it also allowed Wu Ming to take one step closer. The heavenly locks that wrapped around Wu Ming's body were like a swing. Along with the many snake heads that pierced into Wu Ming's body, the heavenly locks directly swung Wu Ming away. Coupled with the force of Wu Ming's jump, and the support from Wu Ming's telekinesis, this scene appeared on the scene. Wu Ming, who was still a few dozen meters away from Gorgon, used less than 0.01 seconds to arrive in front of Gorgon's head. To be more precise, he arrived in front of Gorgon's magic eyes of petrification. At that moment, Wu Ming also stabbed the sword of salvation into Gorgon's eyes, and released the thunder of salvation that gathered on the sword of salvation. Explode. Sword of salvation. Translator. WQL Editor. Alim. After accumulating for a long time, the thunder of salvation broke out in an unprecedented way. The moment it broke out, even Wu Ming was temporarily blinded. Besides the vast expanse of whiteness in front of Wu Ming, there was nothing else. It was almost a form of self-suggestion. When a person closed their eyes, their remaining senses, their ears, would become very useful. This was why students who liked to catch up on sleep between classes found the sound to be particularly loud. At this moment, Wu Ming's ears were filled with the deafening sound of thunder and the miserable cries of Gorgon. In the air, Wuming could even feel the strong wind caused by Gorgon, shaking violently due to the pain. Listening to this mournful cry, Wuming inexplicably felt a trace of pity. However, now was not the time to think about this. Enkidu. Wuming, who had temporarily lost his vision, immediately shouted out Enkidu's name. Clatter. The sound of chains, accompanied by the sound of thunder and the miserable cries of Gorgon, filled Wuming's ears. At the same time, Wuming also felt the heaven lock firmly wrapped around his body. At the next moment, a different map appeared in Wuming's mind after activating his telekinesis. At the same time, Wuming, who had activated his telekinesis, also projected Gorgon's current situation into his mind. At this moment, Gorgon spread out its hands, its broken hair fluttering in the wind. It raised its head and roared at the sky. This extremely miserable scene appeared in Wuming's mind, forcibly suppressing the inexplicable pity in his heart. Wuming looked at a certain direction on the ground and instantly threw Enkidu down. The end of the heaven lock was wrapped around Wuming's body. When Wuming threw the wedge of the heaven lock to the ground, Enkidu would bring Wuming away from Gorgon. Although Wuming, who was temporarily blinded, could still see, for the sake of safety, Wuming still wanted to get away from Gorgon first. It was inevitable that the other party had other abilities that Wuming did not know about. As expected, when Wuming felt that he was being dragged to the ground by Enkidu, something new happened to Gorgon. Chapter 968. Ah! A shrill female voice came out of Gorgon's mouth. A roar filled with hatred that would make anyone who heard it tremble in fear. Not only that, Gorgon's voice no longer sounded like a singing voice. It sounded more like the voice of Gorgon's own consciousness. The maternal aura of Gorgon had completely disappeared, and the aura of hatred that belonged to the Avenger filled Gorgon once again. All of this proved that Gorgon had turned back into Gorgon. Kingu, where are you? Kingu. My eyes. My eyes. Kingu, where are you? Come back to me. Gorgon let out a terrifying roar as he covered his eyes that were bleeding purple blood with both hands. Not only that, but Gorgon's snake hair and injured tail that had been cut off by Wuming were also recovering at a slow but visible speed. It can heal itself. Wuming was confused. Could it be that Gorgon was not completely assimilated by Tiamat's authority? Could it be that it was only the surface that was assimilated, and it would heal if it was seriously injured? Just as Wuming was puzzled, a large amount of black semi-liquid suddenly emerged from Gorgon's wounds that had not fully recovered. It was the origin black soil. Wuming could feel the power of the origin black soil contained within it. The origin black soil reacted with the wounds caused by Wuming's blade of salvation, further increasing Gorgon's pain. His roar gradually became louder than that of a magical beast. Could it be that the reason why Gorgon was assimilated by Tiamat's authority was because of the origin black soil? Just as Wuming was thinking, Enkidu had already pulled Wuming to the ground. Wuming didn't need to use any force. He easily stood on the ground, stirring up a cloud of sand. What the hell is going on? Looking at Gorgon, who was some distance away from him, Wuming was not in a hurry to make his next move. Instead, he fell into deep thought. Gorgon, who seemed to have been assimilated by Tiamat, did not have the slightest trace of the black origin mud in his body, and was unable to heal himself. However, Gorgon, who had been severely injured, broke away from Tiamat's assimilation and leaked the black origin mud from his body. Furthermore, Gorgon's self-healing ability had also returned. Most importantly, who was the Kingu that Gorgon mentioned? In the legends, the son and companion of Tiamat, the god who led 11 magical beasts against the gods but was killed. This was the story of Kingu in myths, and Wuming knew this as well. However, there was no such thing as Kingu in this singularity, right? Wait a minute. Wuming suddenly thought of something. Could it be that the guy who used Enkidu's body was Kingu? However, Wuming was once again puzzled. If it was really Kingu who used Enkidu's body, it was impossible for him to be affected by Enkidu's body. Whether it was the reaction of the fake Enkidu when Wuming left last time, or the reaction of the fake Enkidu when he left just now, it meant that the fake Enkidu was affected by the reaction of Enkidu's body to Wuming and the real Enkidu. If it was a god of the same generation as deity and how could Kingu be affected by the residual memory of less than 100 years? If it was really Kingu, it would definitely not be affected by Enkidu's body, and it would definitely completely crush the residual memory of Enkidu's body. The Kingu that Gorgon mentioned could only be the fake Enkidu who used Enkidu's body. Other than him, there shouldn't be anyone else on the magical beast side, right? Or was the real Kingu hiding in the dark? As expected, I still have to find him and ask him clearly. Wuming was naturally referring to the fake Enkidu. However, before the first wave of trouble subsided, Ishtar used the connection she established with Wuming to ask for help from Wuming. Hyenryong, this is a big crisis. I'm going to die. Hurry up and give me mana. Ishtar's impolite words were transmitted into Wuming's mind. This gave Wuming a fright. Wuming immediately checked Ishtar's mana, but it was completely empty. Not only that, Ishtar was constantly being attacked, and her spiritual base was slowly being damaged. Could it be that she encountered a magical beast commander? That was most likely the case. After thinking about it carefully, it was possible to arrange a magical beast commander in the Persian Gulf, such as the one that was based on the mass-produced magical beast Kururu. It was probably that the magical beast commander was hiding underwater, waiting for Ishtar to exhaust her mana after dealing with other mass-produced magical beasts before attacking Ishtar. This caused Ishtar to be unable to fight back. But remember to be more polite next time. With this sentence, the last arrow-shaped mana crystal on the back of Wuming's right hand disappeared, and Ishtar, who was in the Persian Gulf, was instantly filled with mana. Understood. Ishtar replied to Wuming through the connection between the contract, and then began to counterattack. At this point, the 3 mana crystals prepared for Ishtar were exhausted. When Wuming transferred mana to Ishtar, Gorgon became more extreme. Kingu. My son. Come to my side. Kingu. Did you betray me? His rationality was gradually suppressed by pain and anger. Magical beasts. My sons. Your mother needs you. As if connected by blood, Gorgon's roar could only be heard a few kilometers away, but the mass-produced magical beasts in the Mesopotamia seemed to have heard Gorgon's words. Their eyes turned completely scarlet, and their bodies grew several times in an instant. Whether it was speed or strength, they had an unprecedented increase. It was as if they had entered a berserk mode. The soldiers at the front line of the North Wall were caught off guard by these enhanced magical beasts. For a moment, the soldiers' routine tactics to deal with the magical beasts were broken. Several magical beasts rushed to the iron gate under the North Wall and launched an attack. Even the gate was broken. The North Wall was in great danger. The magical beast commander's strength was also enhanced. Ishtar, who was originally supported by Wuming's mana, regained her advantage and blocked the attacks of the mermaid Kururu and the mermaid Kururu. However, for some reason, the magical beasts of Kururu were suddenly enhanced, and this caught Ishtar off guard. This, what the hell is going on? Ishtar cried as she helplessly retreated. If she did not retreat, she would be surrounded by the magical beasts in the Persian Gulf today. The Persian Gulf was in great danger. Chapter 969. The same great danger also existed in the territory of the feathered serpent god. In the southern jungle, Uxia-Mughar, who was fighting the feathered serpent god, was about to retreat. The mass-produced Uxia-Mughar he brought with him had basically been wiped out by another group of humans who had rushed over to provide support. But at this moment, just like the other magical beast commanders, Uxia-Mughar also sensed the call of the mother goddess. Uxia-Mughar also entered a temporary berserk mode. This time, Uxia-Mughar, who originally wanted to retreat temporarily, did not retreat anymore. He charged directly at the leopard man and quizzed. For a moment, Uxia-Mughar, who was much faster than before, did not allow the leopard man to react in time. Half of her body was torn apart by Uxia-Mughar's claws, and she was sent flying by the inertia caused by Uxia-Mughar's attack. Leopard man. Quizzard was shocked. Why did this Uxia-Mughar suddenly go berserk? But now, Quizzard did not have time to think, because Uxia-Mughar charged at her with extreme speed, and used his huge claws to press down on Quizzard. Great danger. Godatsi and the others, who had been asked by the Leopard Man and Quizzard to be in charge of eliminating the mass-produced Uxiu-Mughar, were not in a good situation either. Godatsi and the others had joined the Feathered Serpent Gods group, and were gradually wiping out the mass-produced Uxiu-Mughar. They were even prepared to help deal with the Commander Uxiu-Mughar. But because of Gorgon, although the number of mass-produced Uxiu-Mughals had been reduced to a certain extent, each mass-produced Uxiu-Mughals had become more powerful. Originally, Mashu could deal with 2 or 3 mass-produced Uxiu-Mughals, but now it was difficult for Mashu to deal with 1 mass-produced Uxiu-Mughals. At the same time, Merlin was half kneeling on the ground for some reason, and vomiting blood. Godatsi and the others were also panicking because of Merlin's sudden change. Merlin, what's wrong with you? Godatsi was escorted to Merlin's side by Matthew, and she asked with concern. Merlin shifted his posture, and leaned against a rock beside him in a slumped posture. However, Merlin still acted as if he was about to die. Something happened to Tiamat's seal, but it doesn't matter. The seal hasn't been completely broken, and I can still hold on. Cough cough. Merlin said something that Godatsi couldn't understand while coughing up more blood. Mr. Merlin, are you sure there's no problem? Once again, Mashu struggled to kick away an attacking Uxiu-Mughar. She could not help but turn to look at Merlin. Merlin's current situation was really worrying. The amount of blood he vomited should be enough for him to leave the stage, right? Ahaha, it's okay. After all, I'm not a human. It's normal for me to vomit more blood than a human. At this point, Merlin still smiled humorously. After that, the sound of chains came from beside everyone. Since Merlin said so, then he must be fine. She beheaded 1 or 2 Uxiu-Mughar that wanted to sneak up on her with her scythe. She dodged the sputtering purple blood from the demonic beast's wounds, and jumped to Godatsi and the other's side. The sound of chains came from the chains on Anna's scythe. Ahaham, Anna. You're still as sharp-tongued as ever. Show some concern for me, Merlin laughed. I'm just telling the truth. Although Anna really wanted to kill Merlin, there was no doubt that Merlin had the highest tacit understanding with Anna. Since Merlin said so, then he was not forcing himself. He must be fine, at least he would not leave the stage. After Anna finished speaking, she looked in the direction of the north wall, and then left to kill other mass-produced demonic beasts. Even if the demonic beasts were strengthened, they would still die as long as their heads were cut off. This was the disadvantage of demonic beasts as beasts. By the way, Senior, should we let Mr. Merlin retreat? Looking at Merlin's condition, if no one was watching, a demonic beast might come and take him away. Matthew was really worried. Don't worry. Although I'm a little weak now, I still have means to protect myself. Anna will kill the other mass-produced demonic beasts. You guys go and support Quizzard. Don't worry about me. But, however, when Matthew was about to say something, Godatsi interrupted Matthew. Let's go, Matthew. We have to believe in Merlin. This was a very important point that Godatsi had learned along the way, to believe in one's companions. That's right. I don't want to die meaninglessly. After all, I still have an important mission. Merlin's eyes flashed with a rare trace of seriousness. Yes, I know, Senior. Mr. Merlin too. Take care. Then, Godatsi and Matthew left Merlin to support Quizzard. After all, before the demonic beasts were inexplicably strengthened again, they had been reduced to a considerable number by everyone. Therefore, there were not many mass-produced Uxiu-Mughals. In addition, Anna was constantly cleaning up, so there were basically no mass-produced Uxiu-Mughals. However, the so-called fish that slipped through the net still existed. A few Uxiu-Mughals somehow came behind Merlin, who was sitting on the ground. They were silent, like wild beasts about to capture their prey. One of the mass-produced Uxiu-Mughals seemed to want to be the first beast to eat the crab. It was one step faster than the other mass-produced demonic beasts and slowly approached Merlin, while the other demonic beasts were in a state of observation. The demonic beasts could sense that the existence in front of them had a lot of magic power, and was probably not to be trifled with. Therefore, when faced with such an enemy, one of the demonic beasts would often take the lead to test the waters. When this mass-produced Uxiu-Mughals was almost close to Merlin, Merlin was still in a state of not noticing anything unusual. In the end, this Uxie suddenly jumped up and pounced directly at Merlin's neck. It looked like it wanted to bite off Merlin's neck in one breath. However, before this mass-produced Uxie could land in the air, a bright holy sword pierced through its head, and it died instantly. This posed a threat to the remaining demonic beasts who wanted to attack Merlin. They were so scared that they scrambled in other directions. However, Merlin would not leave a passerby who might be attacked by these escaping demonic beasts in the lurch. Merlin raised his staff and gently tapped the ground. Several beams as thick as light cannons were fired at the demonic beasts who had not yet run far. The last wails of the demonic beasts reached Merlin's ears. There was no doubt that they had hit. I really am a magician. Chapter 970. These were the words of a court magician whose swordsmanship was better than King Arthur's. Following that, Merlin threw the fake Excalibur in his other hand far away, along with the magic beast carcass on the fake sacred sword, far away from Merlin. Phew. Fortunately, the seal was not completely broken. Really, did Gorgon come directly to the north wall to fight with the Villo? After muttering a few words, Merlin closed his eyes and sneaked into the dream, to begin the repair of Tiamat's seal. While the various lines of defense in Mesopotamia were in crisis, Wu Ming also faced a new situation. Although Wu Ming was very worried about the North Wall, the jungle, and the Persian Gulf, he had to deal with the matter at hand. After Gorgon roared at the sky like a madman, a giant dark green snake appeared in front of Wu Ming. However, there were traces of slight corrosion on the ground leading to the North Wall. It seemed that this poisonous snake came from the North Wall. So that's how it is. The monster commander hiding in the dark is responsible for attacking the North Wall. Wu Ming instantly understood why this giant monster appeared here. It was probably summoned by Gorgon and rushed here from the front line to support Gorgon. Roar! The giant dark green snake roared at Wu Ming. Not only that, but when the other party roared, an outrageous amount of purple saliva fell to the ground, instantly causing an extremely violent corrosion reaction on the bare ground. Obviously, its mouth contained a shocking amount of venom. With this alone, Wu Ming recognized the identity of the other party. The big poisonous snake Basumu. Although it was said to be a poisonous snake, it looked more like a dragon. Especially at the back of its head, there was a pair of soft horns full of barbs. Moreover, its entire head looked incomparably hard, as if it was wearing a helmet. Its two pairs of four large eyes were emitting a red light, looking quite horrifying. However, although it was a dragon, Basumu only had a pair of forelimbs. In addition, there was a long tail. Countless dark green scales were attached to the long tail like armor. There was also an unusually sturdy breastplate above the forelimbs. Not only that, but both sides of Basumu's body, spine, and tail were also full of spikes, especially the spikes on the tail. Not only that, these spikes were also shining with dark green light, and looked full of venom, but the degree of venom was not as strong as the venom in Basuma's mouth. Wu Ming judged this because of the degree of corrosion of the road leading to the North Wall. This guy is a bit difficult to deal with. Wu Ming saw Basuma's uniqueness at a glance. First of all, Wu Ming had never encountered any mass-produced versions of Basumu. It was obvious that this was the only prototype of Basumu. This also meant that this Bashiomu's specialized Bashiomu was the first and only one. Secondly, this Basuma's body was covered with an unusually sturdy armor that could be seen with the naked eye. It was obvious that this was added by someone at a later stage. In other words, this Basuma's body was quite fragile and needed a sturdy armor. This was completely different from the other magical beast commanders. The other magical beast commanders had extremely tough bodies. Ulidim could withstand Wu Ming's multiple spells without dying. Ulidim was also completely killed by Ereshkigal's attacks several times. Basumu, on the other hand, gave people the feeling that his body was extremely fragile. However, sacrificing his physical strength also meant that Basumu must have strengths in other aspects. For example, Basuma's venom. Regardless of the time, place, or even the world, poison was something that people feared and avoided. Although its scale was not as big as a natural disaster, its degree of terror was no less than a natural disaster. Whether in mythology or history, There were many heroes who were killed by poison. The most typical example was the teacher of the Greek heroes that Wu Ming met in the Holy Grail War of the 14 Horsemen, and the American Singularity, the Greek god Charon, who was of the same generation as Zeus. Charon, who was poisoned to death by the venom of the viper Hydra, could be said to be the most typical example. Since there were heroes who were poisoned to death, there were also many poison experts. The most typical example was Semiramis, who had poisoned Mordred half to death in the Holy Grail War of the 14 Horsemen. She was evaluated in history as the oldest poison killer. After becoming a heroic spirit, Semiramis' poison was undoubtedly fatal to her servants. Semiramis' control of poison had almost reached the peak. At that time, when Wu Ming intervened in the Holy Grail War between the black and red sides, most of the masters of the red side were poisoned by Semiramis. They were controlled under the condition that they did not die. From this, it could be seen how powerful Semiramis' control of poison was. Moreover, not only was she a poison expert, it was said that in her hanging garden of Babylon, there was a big venomous snake. That's right, it was one of the 11 sons of Tiamat in front of Wu Ming, the big venomous snake, Basumu. Wu Ming didn't know where Basumu in Semiramis' hanging garden of Babylon came from, but after all, Semiramis was the queen of Assyria in the Mesopotamia region, so it was not surprising that Basumu existed in her hanging garden of Babylon. Basumu, who existed in the hanging garden of Babylon, could be said to be Semiramis' ghost card. If there was no accident, when she used this ghost card on the enemy would undoubtedly die, whether it was a servant or a human. Of course, there was an exception to the existence of special abilities. In short, the Basumu in front of him was powerful. In Wu Ming's view, even if all the other demonic beast commanders were added together, they would not be able to defeat Basumu. If you want to ask why, for example, now, Basumu opened his mouth in the direction of Wu Ming, and countless purple liquid spurted out. It was like a flash flood, like a tsunami, sweeping over Wu Ming. The speed was so fast that Wu Ming almost couldn't react. Wu Ming, who was frowning, instantly jumped up and flew into the air. He even smelled a trace of poison. It was reasonable to say that even if it was a servant, after smelling such a trace of poison, there would be severe adverse reactions. But unfortunately, Wu Ming was immune to negative effects such as poison. This was all due to the effect of the dragon body. Wu Ming, who cheated every day, naturally made this spiritual base according to his body. Therefore, Wu Ming's spiritual base should also be immune to poison. However, the spiritual base was a spiritual base after all, not the body. The spiritual base was definitely much weaker than the body, so Wu Ming would definitely be affected by negative effects. Just like if Wu Ming was hit by Gorgon's petrification ray, he would definitely enter a slow petrification state. Therefore, Wu Ming avoided the petrification ray. Wu Ming's current spiritual base was equivalent to having a great resistance to negative effects. Chapter 971. Wu Ming wasn't afraid of the trace of poisonous gas produced by Basumu's poison. Even if he inhaled the poisonous gas into his body, it wouldn't be a big deal. After all, the immunity effect would have some effect. But if it was a sea of poison on the scale of a flood, it would be a different story. Moreover, looking at the poisonous liquid that was rapidly spreading on the ground below like a flood, Wu Ming inexplicably felt a trace of disgust. This made Wu Ming feel that it would be better for him to fly into the sky. Let's not talk about other things first. This poisonous liquid looked really disgusting. After all, it was spat out by Basuma's mouth. This made Wu Ming directly reject the plan of using the Heaven Lock to deal with Basumu. Even if Enkidu wasn't afraid of poison, he didn't want Enkidu to be stained with this stuff. He guessed that Enkidu wouldn't want to either. The venom spread all over the ground, and even Gorgon was caught in it. But for some reason, Gorgon wasn't affected by the poisonous liquid. Was it because he was the goddess of magical beasts, or was he affected by the black mud? Looking at Gorgon, whose wounds had completely healed, Wu Ming couldn't help but think so. The black mud gushing out of Gorgon's wounds had also stopped, but the black mud didn't spread. It just wrapped around Gorgon's body. That was why Wu Ming guessed that it was because of the black mud that Gorgon wasn't affected by the poisonous liquid. Then Wu Ming flew directly to Gorgon. Due to the recovery of his self-healing ability, Gorgon's magic eye that was originally destroyed by Wuming was now slowly recovering. The magic eye was a big killer for Gorgon, but it was also a very troublesome existence for Wuming, so Wuming couldn't wait for Gorgon's magic eye to recover. The so-called take advantage of someone's illness was the current situation. Gorgon's demon eye had yet to recover, and the snake hair alone was not enough to stop Wuming's advance. Therefore, Gorgon could be said to be a lamb waiting to be slaughtered by Wuming. However, Bashiomu would not let Wuming kill Gorgon. Bashiomu was like a loach, slipping through the sea of venom it spewed out. In an instant he arrived in front of Wuming, blocking his path. Roar! Following Bashiomu's roar, countless amounts of venom were sprayed out by Bashiomu, which made Wuming instantly retreat far away. You're really annoying. Wuming, who had retreated to a distance and cursed, raised the divine blade of salvation. Holy light gathered on the divine blade of salvation, gradually illuminating the surroundings like a flash bomb. Divine blade of salvation, show the light of salvation and bring peace to the world. With the infusion of magic power from Wuming, the venom was illuminated by the light of the divine blade of salvation. In the next second, the venom began to gradually dissipate as if it had met its natural enemy. It did not turn into gas, but directly disappeared. As the name suggested, the light of salvation that came with the divine blade of salvation had a strong effect on these filthy things. Not only did the divine blade of salvation have an effect on the venom, but it also reacted to Bashiomu, who released it. Roar! Bashiomu let out a blood-curdling scream, as if a vampire was directly exposed to the sun. His whole body emitted purple smoke. Ah! Gorgon seemed to be slightly affected as well. A trace of the power of the divine blade of salvation reacted to the black mud on Gorgon's body, causing Gorgon great pain. My son! My Bashiomu! Destroy him! Gorgon roared as if he had gone mad. He felt even more abnormal than before. However, Bashiomu could not take care of himself at this moment. Like a loach, he rolled around in the gradually disappearing sea of venom. But in the next second, as if it had reached its limit, the black mud on Gorgon's body began to spread. At this moment, Gorgon was like a fountain of black mud gushing out endlessly. A large amount of black mud covered the venom on the ground, and Bashiomu was also covered by the black mud. Not good. Wuming could not help but be shocked. He knew better than anyone what would happen to an existence eroded by the black mud. Every existence eroded by the black mud would become hostile to Wuming, and their strength would greatly increase. Sure enough, Bashiomu, who was no longer rolling around after being covered by the black mud, slowly stood up. His originally dark green body had turned into a black snake, and his forelimbs had disappeared for some reason. It could be said that he had turned into a snake in the truest sense. Gorgon, who had become the fountain of the black mud, was now completely covered by the black mud. She abandoned Wuming and walked towards the north wall, which surprised Wuming. If Gorgon went to the north wall, then the people in the north wall would definitely be finished. Even if they had servants, it would be useless. Gorgon, who had obtained Tiamat's authority, could not be dealt with by the number of servants. Now that he was covered by the black mud, it was really a big crisis. Wuming subconsciously wanted to stop Gorgon, but someone stopped him first. Hiss! Bashiomu, who had turned into a black snake, appeared in front of Wuming. He made a strange roar and directly opened his mouth to bite Wuming. In an instant, Wuming was swallowed by Bashiomu. However, a few seconds later, a light appeared on Bashiomu's stomach. The next second, the light exploded and Wuming flew out from it. Because of the light of salvation, Wuming was not contaminated with the poison. No, it should be said that he was not contaminated with the black mud. Bashiomu, who had been eroded by the black mud, had turned into black mud. His mouth and stomach were full of black mud, but it was also full of poison. This guy's speed has become a lot faster. If Wuming could still look down on Bashiomu before, now that Wuming was facing Bashiomu who had been eroded by the black mud, he could no longer do so. The previous Bashiomu was only poisonous, but now Bashiomu was not only poisonous and had the black mud, but his physical fitness was also much stronger than the other monster commanders Wuming had seen. Looking in the direction of Gorgon, Wu-Ming found that there was a big hole in the direction Gorgon was going, and Gorgon was long gone. It seemed that Gorgon had drilled into the ground through this hole. However, Gorgon's destination would not change. It was definitely going to the north wall. However, Wu-Ming could not leave now. As for why Wu-Ming split Bashimu, who was rushing over, with his sword and frowned more and more. It was a fact that he could not leave, but he could not let this guy go. The current Gorgon was dangerous, but the current Bashimu was even more dangerous. Its poison and black mud were much more dangerous than Gorgon. Wu-Ming held the blade of salvation horizontally in his hand, and his face became firm. He had to get rid of this guy here. Chapter 972. Roar. Wu-Ming swung the blade of salvation and rushed towards Bashimu. The blade of salvation with the black root soil was a lethal weapon for Bashimu at this moment. Hiss! Bashimu wasn't afraid of Wu-Ming either. He let out a strange roar, and also charged at Wu-Ming. Bashimu quickly swung his body, which had become more agile after losing his forelimbs, in an attempt to distract Wu-Ming so that Wu-Ming could not determine from which side he would attack from. However, Wu-Ming did not pay attention to Bashimu's head at all. He stared closely at a certain part of Bashimu's body, the so-called 7 inches part. Wu-Ming did not know if the so-called 7 inches was Bashimu's weakness, but Wu-Ming had seen before that Bashimu's body was covered by an extremely thick breastplate from the head down to the chest. Defense naturally existed in the strongest part, but it was often the weakest part. It was precisely because it was weak that it needed the strongest defense. Just like how Gadatsi as a master was extremely weak, so she needed Matthew's protection. It was the same principle. Therefore, Wu-Ming guessed that the part of Bashimu's chest that was covered with armor was its weakness. Bashimu and Wu-Ming did not slow down at all. At the moment when they were about to meet, Bashimu launched an attack from Wu-Ming's left side by constantly swaying, opening his poisonous mouth to bite Wu-Ming. Looking at the huge poisonous needle in Bashimu's mouth, if this bite hit, Wu-Ming was afraid that he would directly leave. However, Wu-Ming turned a deaf ear to this poisonous mouth and stared straight at Bashimu's chest. I am the strongest and the one who holds all victory in my hands. No matter if it is a human or a demon, I will defeat any enemy that stands in my way. Giant with supreme power, give me your aid. Wu-Ming's words left his mouth. In an instant, just as Bashimu's fangs were about to touch Wu-Ming's skin, a golden substance appeared on Wu-Ming's body and blocked Bashimu's attack. That was the byproduct of the giant incarnation. It was the substance that could form a golden giant around Wu-Ming. Then Wu-Ming chanted the spirit of words. All evildoers, be afraid of my power. Now, I will obtain the majesty of 10 mountains, the strength of 100 rivers, and the strength of 1,000 dragons. What the majestic me brings is the mark of the dragon seed that calls for victory. After the incantation, the golden substance instantly condensed and attached itself to Wu-Ming in the form of a dragonoid. It then grabbed Bashimu in its hand. This was the effect of the dragon seed incarnation on the giant incarnation. Bashimu, who had never seen such a scene, was shocked. He tried to break free from the dragonoid's hand, but to no avail. That was to be expected. The giant incarnation had unparalleled strength, while the dragon seed incarnation had the attribute of a dragon. In terms of strength, Bashimu was inferior to the giant incarnation. In terms of attribute, Bashimu also had the attribute of a dragon. No matter what, it would be defeated. For a moment, Bashimu was at his wit's end. However, Bashimu's strongest point had always been his poison. Sizzle! The dragonoid's hand that grabbed Bashimu began to dissolve because of the poison on Bashimu's body. But Wu-Ming didn't have the slightest knowledge of this. Wu-Ming raised the divine blade of salvation, and an identical divine blade of salvation appeared in the giant dragonoid's hand. However, the divine blade of salvation was made of pure energy just like the dragonoid. However, this divine blade of salvation in the form of energy also had the power of the divine blade of salvation in Wu-Ming's hand. Divine blade of salvation, burst forth with the thunder of salvation. Help me eliminate the world's suffering. Along with Wu-Ming's words, the dragonoid raised the divine blade of salvation in its hand. Kacha! Suddenly, A thunder from the cloudless sky suddenly fell on the divine blade of salvation, and the entire divine blade of salvation made of energy instantly became real. It felt like a real divine blade of salvation. The whole Mesopotamia seemed to have heard the thunder. Whether it was demonic beasts, humans, or servants, they couldn't help but look up at the sky. But then they returned to the matter in front of them, which was fighting. On Wuming's side, Bashyomu, who was tightly held in the dragonoid's hand, showed fear. He was already struggling, but now he was struggling even more fiercely as if his body was about to break. Kacha! Another thunder, but the sound was not as loud as before. Splat! Bashyomu, who had been cut in half, kept flopping on the ground like a dehydrated fish. The broken part was the part below the head and above the chest, which was the so-called 7 inches. This caused Bashyomu, who had been cut in half, to look like his tail was several times longer than his head. Bashyomu did not break in half by himself, but by the divine blade of salvation. The second thunder came from the divine blade of salvation, which was what Bashyomu wanted. He successfully escaped from the dragonoid's hand. However, Bashyomu, who had escaped from the dragonoid's hand and fell to the ground, slowly stopped flopping. It seemed like Wuming's guess was right. That was Bashyomu's weakness. Enemies eroded by the black origin mud would indeed pose a threat to Wuming, but not every enemy was as powerful as Gidia. Even if Bashyomu was strengthened by the black origin mud, he was still no match for Wuming after Wuming attacked his weakness. However, as the saying goes, cut the grass and dig up the roots. Who knew if Bashyomu was faking it? It would be bad if Bashyomu bit Wuming when he let his guard down or left Wuming. After all, snakes were also creatures that knew how to deceive. The dragonoid raised the divine blade of salvation again, but this time it was not the thunder of salvation, but the light of salvation. Huff! A flame appeared at the tip of the divine blade of salvation. The flame gradually grew bigger, and slowly became an existence comparable to the sun. Wuming had used this sun many times. This was another way to use the light of salvation. The original illumination of all things was only a low-level light of salvation. When it turned into a flame, it was the true manifestation of the light of salvation. It was a light that was enough to kill Bashyomu. Bashyomu let out a strange roar again, but this time, his voice was filled with the fear of death. Purify the filth, light of salvation. As Wuming whispered softly, the sun on the divine blade of salvation was like a fountain of flames. It continued to radiate flames to the surroundings, enveloping Bashyomu, the black origin mud on his body, and the poison that was mixed with the black origin mud in the surroundings. The black origin mud and the poison were all destroyed by the light of salvation, which contained the power of the origin. Bashyomu, on the other hand, died completely in the sound of burning flames. Chapter 973. While Wuming was killing Bashyomu, the beasts in the north wall were resting. The reason was that the commanders of the beasts were fighting near the north wall. Behind a relatively hidden mound, a gigantic 7-headed serpent was fighting with a white-clothed green-haired man. The two were precisely Musamaf, and the fake that had taken over Enkidu's body. However, he couldn't be called the fake Enkidu, so he decided to call him Jingu for now. Hiss! As a huge 7-headed snake, Musumafu didn't rush up to fight with Jingu. Instead, he fought with Jingu like a kite, as if he didn't want to launch a severe attack on Jingu, but also didn't want Jingu to leave. Kingu had a tangled expression on his face. As the son of the Warcraft goddess, Jingu had heard Gorgon's roar just now. Although Jingu was helpless to be regarded as a traitor by Gorgon, it could not be helped. He did not say it in front of that person, otherwise his brain would be affected. There was another thing that made Kingu feel helpless. The other commanders really treated him as a traitor. He wasn't a traitor. Even if he was, he couldn't fight with Musamaf, who was also a commander. Fortunately, Musamaf didn't have the intention to fight. Musamaf, I know you are afraid of me. You don't have to be like this. I don't have the intention to betray Mother. Musamaf was known to be a two-faced fence-sitter among the demon commanders. In the beginning, because there were more humanoid demon commanders than beast-type demon commanders, Musamaf had the intention to switch sides with the humanoid demon commanders. When he and Yukur fell into the underworld that was blasted open by Ishtar, he even used Yukur to send him to Ereshkigal to his death, thus covering his escape from the underworld. After that, when he saw that the humanoid demon commanders had lost their advantage, he turned back to the beast-type demon commanders. Jingu himself wasn't interested in the division of magical beast commanders, but even he couldn't help but feel extreme disgust towards Muzamaf, who was two-faced and disobedient in public but opposed in private. In Kinga's view, this guy wasn't qualified to be his brother. After Gorgon issued an urgent command to the demons, Basumu, who was commanding the demons to attack the north wall with Muzamaf, rushed to Gorgon's side. Muzamaf, who had volunteered to stay behind, was given the order by Basumu to kill Jingu, who had betrayed their mother goddess. However, Muzamaf was a two-faced and cowardly commander. How could he fight Kingu to the death? This made Kingu look down on Muzamaf even more. I think you have felt it too. Basumu has just died. The reason why you are here is because you are afraid of being killed by that man. That man will come here soon. If you continue to waste time with me, you will be killed by that man in the end. The commanders of the beasts had telepathy. Kingu had felt it when Basumu was killed by Wuming. Kingu believed that Muzamaf must have felt it too, and Kingu was prepared to use this to scare Muzamaf away. However, the cowardly Muzamaf didn't show any signs of retreating even though his 7 heads showed a trace of fear. This was because he had also sensed that his mother goddess was rushing over. The fear on Muzamaf's 7 heads was only because he was afraid of the man Kingu had mentioned. He had stayed behind voluntarily because he was afraid of being killed by that man when he went to support his mother goddess. Sure enough, Basumu, who had gone to support his mother goddess, was killed. Although that man had already begun to rush over, the mother goddess was also rushing over. In fact, the mother goddess was 1 step ahead of that man. With the protection of the mother goddess, there was no need for him to be afraid. Kacha! A huge figure appeared from this huge rift valley. It was Gorgon, who had been corroded by the black mud. The originally pure white wings with a hint of gold had turned pitch black, and the purple snake hair had also turned dark purple. The originally pitch black scales had become even more filthy, as if they were full of curses. Finally, Gorgon's originally pure white skin was now shrouded in a black fog. Only his demonic eyes still shone with an ominous purple light. Being tainted by the black mud in the Rift Valley, Gorgon had become even crazier than an Avenger. Kingu, you betrayed me. Gorgon, whose mind was already somewhat abnormal, bent down with a ferocious expression. He looked at Kingu in front of him and roared furiously, filled with the desire for revenge. Mother, you were too anxious and made the wrong judgment. As the child of the goddess of magical beasts, I would never betray her. Kingu faced Gorgon's huge head without showing any signs of being misunderstood. There was only calmness and a smile on his face. Gorgon widened her purple demonic eyes and looked at Kingu crazily without saying a word. After a short while, Gorgon slowly raised her body, perhaps admitting that she had made the wrong judgment. In short, Gorgon didn't look for trouble with Kingu. Kingu smiled when he saw this and then flew to Gorgon's ear. Mother, the landing of Kururu in the Persian Gulf was very successful, and Uzumughar is also entangled with Quizzard. Now we just need to break through the north wall, and the humans will be in our pocket. Without responding to Kingu, Gorgon directly began to give orders. Magical beasts, listen to my orders. The magical sound like a sound wave filled the minds of the magical beasts in the north wall. The magical beasts that were resting at the north wall all stood up. Destroy the humans. As soon as Gorgon's order came out, countless magical beasts rushed to the north wall. Musumafu also rushed to the north wall with the magical beasts. It could be seen that although Musumafu was two-faced and timid, as long as it was the order of the goddess, he would carry it out to the end. This was also the reason why Kingu didn't take the opportunity to get rid of Musumafu even though he hated him. When the guards on the northern wall saw this scene, they all became absent-minded. Some of them even dropped their weapons. They were desperate. Chapter 974. It's really come to this. Despair filled their hearts. Seeing this, Leonidas silently made a judgment. However, they couldn't be blamed for this. Facing the gigantic serpent god Gorgon in the distance, and facing so many magical beasts, even Leonidas, who had led 300 men to fight against tens of thousands of enemies, couldn't help but feel fear. If they were facing an army of humans, perhaps they wouldn't lose their fighting spirit. However, they were facing incomprehensible magical beasts. After all, magical beasts weren't humans. They were existences that couldn't be defeated in a one-on-one battle. In the face of magical beasts that outnumbered the soldiers by several times, it was natural that the soldiers would choose to give up and despair. However, even if everyone gave up, Leonidas wouldn't give up. People could fall into confusion and despair, but he couldn't. Because he was the epitome of history, the hero of human history. He was the undead spirit that led humans to the future. Since the people were in despair, then as a heroic spirit, he had to give them hope. Since they couldn't stop the magical beasts, then he would be the one to stop them. Leonidas had promised Wooming that he would defend the northern wall, while Wooming wasn't around. Even if they had only met a few times, Leonidas wouldn't go back on his word. With that thought in mind, Leonida jumped off the north wall and landed in front of one of the portals. "General Leonidas?" Some of them shouted in fright, but most of them were already speechless. Ignoring the situation of the people on the northern wall, Leonidas looked straight ahead and silently watched the demons charging towards him. Step by step he walked forward. At this moment, it would be a lie to say that he wasn't afraid. At this moment, Leonidas was nervous and afraid, but more than that, he was excited from the bottom of his heart. This scene was much more magnificent than when he led 300 elites to fight against the Persian army. When he faced the Persian army, he was nervous, afraid, and other negative emotions. He was afraid that he would fail, and if he failed, his family and the people of Sparta would be ravaged by the Persian army. Leonidas was worried about everything. However, something happened. While Leonidas was nervous, it was his 300 friends who were watching. In the end, they helped Leonidas resolve the confusion in his heart. Therefore, even if he had become a heroic spirit and a servant, Leonidas didn't think that he was the one who stopped the Persian army at the hot spring gate. That was the shared glory of the 300 Spartans, including Leonidas. And this glory that belonged to the 300 Spartans had been sublimated into his noble phantasm. At some point, blue flames appeared behind Leonidas as he walked forward, and the number of flames was still increasing. That was the soul fire. Countless soul fires turned into human figures. They were all warriors with spears and shields. They were the 300 Spartan warriors. The blue flames were their soul fires. And Leonidas' noble phantasm was to summon the souls of the 300 Spartans to reenact the battle of the hot spring gate. When the demonic beasts were about to approach, Leonidas stopped and knocked the ground with his spear. "If you want to die, come and get it." The 300 Spartans repeated Leonidas' words and knocked the ground twice with their spears. "If you want to die, come and get it." He threw the soul spear in his hand at the attacking magical beast army and let out a furious roar. The spear pierced through countless magical beasts, but it was unable to stop the invasion of the magical beasts. To the tens of thousands of magical beasts, this amount of casualties was just a drop in the bucket. Many magical beasts continued to rush over. Although the 300 Spartans didn't have their spears, they still had their shields. The Spartans formed by the blue soul fire held their shields and ran in front of Leonidas, forming a rather thin shield barrier. However, their shields weren't the round shields in their hands, but their bodies. "Let's go, friends. Gather your souls here." When the 300 warriors formed a shield wall, Leonidas placed the spear in his right hand on the round shield in his left hand. Then, Leonidas slashed the round shield with the spear, and a flame suddenly ignited on the round shield. Leonidas then shouted the name of his relic. In an instant, countless flames appeared on Leonidas' round shield and spread all around, igniting the 300 warriors made of blue soul fire. In the next second, the 300 warriors made of blue soul fire instantly turned orange-red, and the warriors' figures gradually dissipated. Only the 300 shields emitting blazing hearts remained. Countless soul fires turned into red round shields, neatly arranged in the air, forming a shield formation, forming a true shield wall. The shields quickly moved to both sides, defending the entire north wall. The 300 shields became dots, and between the dots, there was an orange-red light film. The seemingly thin light film added an impenetrable layer of defense to the north wall. At this moment, countless demonic beasts had arrived in front of the north wall, or rather, the light film. They crashed into Leonidas's relic, using their teeth and claws, but no matter how hard they tried, they couldn't break through the defense of the shield wall. The people who saw this scene also recovered from their despair. They hadn't failed yet. With the help of the future heroes in human history, how could they fail? General Leonidas. The people guarding the north wall began to cheer for Leonidas, but at the same time, they didn't forget their duty. That was to guard the north wall as soldiers. One by one, the most powerful weapons for humans were activated, and the people were manually aiming at the demonic beast army, but they didn't dare to release the divine power seal. The soldiers were worried that releasing the divine power seal would destroy Leonidas's relic. Therefore, they could only watch in silence, clenching their fists, gritting their teeth, and blaming themselves for giving up just now. Leonidas, who turned back to look at this scene, smiled because the soldiers had regained their fighting spirit. As long as the soldiers' despair and giving up were dispelled, Leonidas felt that this trip was worth it, even if he had to sacrifice himself in front of the demonic beasts. However, in the next moment, something unexpected happened. Chapter 975. Jina Wang Lutan's second scenery. Suddenly, the voice of a young female general entered Leonida's ears. Dan no Yura aso Tobi. In an instant, a few silhouettes flashed past the demonic beasts outside of Leonidas' noble phantasm. After a few flashes of light, a large amount of demonic beasts' blood splattered all over the place. The purple blood gushed out like a fountain, and splashed onto Leonidas' noble phantasm's light barrier. This is General Nuwakamaru. Leonida immediately recognized the owner of this technique and voice. It was the Tengu girl, Nuwakamaru. However, not only Nuwakamaru, but also Nuwakamaru's warrior monk, who had been following Nuwakamaru, also came here. Your Excellency Leonida, this humble monk and Master Nuwakamaru have begun to move freely under King Gilgamesh's orders. It seems like this humble monk and Master Nuwakamaru are not late. A man with many weapons on his back and Bicento in both hands, Musasobo Benkei, walked to Leonida's side from behind and stood upright with weapons in his hands. Oh, General Baiching, you're here too. Leonidas was deeply moved. As a comrade who had fought alongside him, the meticulous Leonidas naturally sensed the fear of death in Takeshi Kei's heart. He did not expect that Kei would be able to come to the front lines. If it was the Musasobo Benkei who didn't go through the beheading operation, no one would think that Musasobo Benkei was a coward. However, after surviving the beheading operation, Musasobo Benkei could be said to have changed into a different person, or it could be said that he no longer suppressed the fear in his heart. After that, everyone could see that Musasobo Benkei was afraid of the battlefield and demonic beasts. And of course, those who saw Musasobo Benkei's cowardice included Leonida. However, the cowardly Musasobo Benkei came to the front line with Nuwakamaru. How could Leonida not be surprised? This humble monk is just a coward who carries the name of Musasobo Benkei. Since this humble monk carries the name of Musasobo Benkei, this humble monk will fulfill the duty of Musasobo Benkei and follow Master Nuwakamaru at all times. Musasobo Benkei, or rather the Sea Lord who carried the name of Musasobo Benkei, said something that surprised Leonida's words. Leonida could tell that this soldier monk wasn't lying. He stared straight at Nuwakamaru, who was flying up and down among the demonic beasts without the slightest hint of fear or cowardice. Ha ha! Looks like King Gilgamesh's decision to let you stay by General Nuwakamaru's side is quite effective. Leonida laughed heartily. As a hero who left his name in human history, the soldier monk standing next to Leonidas, regardless of whether it was Bianqing of Musashi or Haizun of Chonglu, as long as he was still a heroic spirit, he would definitely be able to overcome the fear in his heart. The only thing that would affect him was when he would wake up. Gilgamesh knew this very well, which was why he let Musasobo Benkei stay by Nuwakamaru's side. Nuwakamaru didn't disappoint and successfully pulled Musasobo Benkei back from the hell of cowardice. Ahem. General Leonida, we are still at war. Musasobo Benkei couldn't help but remind him. Leonida's laughter sounded like a party. Leonida's laughter wasn't soft. Not only did Musasobo Benkei hear it, but even Nuwakamaru, who was fighting the demonic beasts outside the light barrier, heard it. Hey, General Leonida, this isn't the time to laugh, right? How long can your noble phantasm last? Nuwakamaru, who was jumping around and killing the demonic beasts. One of the Nuwakamaru who was closest to Leonida couldn't help but complain. Then he quickly asked about the matter at hand. Nyoruawan, who used the eightfold jump, used the demonic beasts as a springboard. The demonic beasts could not hurt Nyoruawan at all, but she could only create a few clones after using the eightfold jump. On the other hand, there were thousands of demonic beasts. She might not be able to kill them all even if she spent a day killing them. It was not a good idea to continue wasting time like this. Besides, it was also beneficial for them to know the duration of Leonidas' noble phantasm. I'm sorry, my noble phantasm can only last for a short period of time. It's reaching its limit soon. Just like what Leonidas said, his noble phantasm could only last for a short period of time. The reason why Leonidas sacrificed himself to protect his allies at Hot Spring Gate was to give his comrades the opportunity to counterattack. Leonidas believed that they could do it, and that they would be able to do it under his protection. His noble phantasm, the guardian of the Flame Gate, also appeared at Hot Spring Gate. However, it could only last for a short period of time. In addition, the demonic beasts were constantly attacking the light barrier. Even if Nuwakamaru started killing the demonic beasts, it was useless. This caused the duration of Leonida's noble phantasm to become shorter and shorter. Leonida originally wanted to revive the morale of his soldiers. He didn't even consider if he could survive this battle. It could be said that Leonida's mentality was exactly the same as Hot Spring Gate. He was already prepared to die. However, there was a difference between this and Hot Spring Gate. This time there were reinforcements. My noble phantasm is about to disappear. You guys should take this opportunity to retreat. After Leonida finished speaking, his noble phantasm's light barrier began to dim as if it was reaching its limit. Although there were reinforcements, it was still useless against such a large number of demonic beasts. Once the light barrier was broken, they would fall into the demonic beasts with Leonida. What awaited them was only death. Leonida didn't want Nuwakamaru and Musasobo Benkei to die with him. That was why he wanted Nuwakamaru and Musasobo Benkei to retreat while he could still hold on. No, Mr. Leonida, we don't need to retreat. Musasobo Benkei said something that confused Leonida. Just as Leonidas was about to ask, something unexpected happened. Countless vines rose from the ground outside the north wall and attacked the demonic beasts' abdomens from below. The demonic beasts didn't even have time to scream before they were torn apart by the vines that were still growing. Woo! A strange roar echoed throughout the north wall. This is... Leonida was shocked by the sudden appearance of the vines. But soon Leonida reacted. He had seen these vines before. They were the vines that blocked the demonic beasts for the incomplete north wall half a year ago. Although it had been half a year, Leonida still remembered it clearly. He couldn't be wrong. The one who did this must be mythical beast Funbaba? Chapter 976. When Leonidas said this name, the ground in the middle of the horde suddenly split open, and a huge green creature that looked like a bear or a deer emerged. This creature was Funbaba. Woo! After Funbaba broke out of the ground, its body was not stained with the slightest bit of dirt. Its huge body stood in the middle of the horde like a crane in a flock of chickens. Leonidas didn't know what to say when he saw this scene. In short, his heart was filled with emotions. This poor monk in Nuwakamaru, Sama passed by the abandoned Hyenryong shrine on our way here. At that time, Hyenryong, Sama's Funbaba suddenly emerged from the Hyenryong shrine and came with us to the north wall. Musasobo Benkei, who was standing beside Leonidas, explained. It turned out that after Wuming left, Funbaba helped the humans build a wall made of vines and ran to the Hyenryong shrine to hibernate. Wuming didn't think that Funbaba would be able to hibernate in his shrine because there was nothing in the shrine that needed to be taken. In addition, Wuming also heard that the shrine was abandoned, so he didn't go there. This led to Wuming never meeting Funbaba. Although Wuming's shrine was cleaned by Siduri from time to time, because of the horde, Siduri didn't go there often. It could be said that for the past 6 months, she basically didn't go there. It could be said that it was abandoned. After Wuming used Yggdrasil, which was one with Funbaba, through the connection between the two, he accidentally woke up the sleeping Funbaba. Funbaba's arrival at this moment could be said to be a miracle for Leonidas, because it gave him hope. This was the end of the Age of the Gods, a time when miracles still existed and mysteries had yet to completely disappear. Because of this, Leonidas did not repeat the mistakes of Hot Spring Gate. The reason why Funbaba didn't make a move before was because it needed time to construct a new vine barrier. Nuwakamaru used his noble phantasm's remaining energy to display his amazing jumping ability. He jumped from the top of Leonidas' noble phantasm and landed steadily beside Leonidas and Musasobo Benkei. The vines that rose from the ground in front of the light continued to thicken and intertwine with each other. Just like Nuwakamaru said, they gradually formed a vine barrier and protected the entire north wall. At this time, Leonidas' noble phantasm couldn't hold on any longer. The light barrier directly dimmed, and the orange-red shield that connected all the light barriers directly shattered. Leonidas staggered, but before Musasobo Benkei could help him, Leonidas used his spear to support himself and stood up straight again. "Are you okay, Your Excellency Leonidas?" Musasobo Benkei couldn't help but ask. The consumption of magic is a bit high. After all, Leonidas' noble phantasm protected the entire north wall, so the consumption of magic was naturally not small. "Since you can still move, then you should be able to kill monsters," Nuwakamaru said as he used his thin green sword to pierce through the gaps of the vine barrier and kill the monsters that continuously attacked the vine barrier one by one. Although this was not the style of a general, at least he didn't have to worry about his life. It saved him time and energy, and he only needed to use his weapon to successfully stab the monsters. After all, this was war, and only victory was the foundation of everything. And with Funbaba's surprise attack, no matter how many magic beasts there were, their efforts would be futile. Due to the impact of Funbaba's appearance, countless monsters around were sent flying. Then countless monsters swarmed towards Funbaba, who wasn't a monster, and prepared to tear this enemy apart. They were under the influence of Gorgon, and no longer had fear. Even if Funbaba was a mythical monster, they still dared to rush up and kill it. However, even after 2 rounds of strengthening, the monsters were still no match for Funbaba. The only advantage the monsters had was that they became fearless because of Gorgon's final command. If their opponent was a human, perhaps the monster's fearlessness would be extremely terrifying. Unfortunately, the monsters were facing a mythical monster, Funbaba. Woo! Funbaba let out its unique roar while summoning vines from the ground to attack the monsters that approached it. The monsters couldn't get close to Funbaba at all. When they got close, they were either pierced by the vines or crushed by the vines. Countless monsters' blood splashed on the ground, but because of the distance, there wasn't a trace of purple blood within a few meters of Funbaba. It looked like it was handling the situation with ease. At this moment, Funbaba's hind legs were bent, its butt was on the ground, and it was using its forelimbs to support its body. It looked like Funbaba was quite noble. As more and more monsters were killed by Funbaba, Musumaf, as the monster commander, made his move. The originally stable ground under Funbaba's feet suddenly bulged. Funbaba jumped to avoid the 7 snake heads that were trying to attack it. The vines paved the way for Funbaba. Funbaba wasn't stained by the blood on the ground at all. It changed to another place and used the vines to clean up all the monsters there. Funbaba once again sat down nobly and continued to clean up the monsters. Musumaf, who broke out from the ground where Funbaba was originally sitting, didn't leave the ground and wasn't in a hurry to attack Funbaba. Instead, it slowly retracted the 7 snake heads back into the ground and hid again. Although Musumaf was affected by Gorgon, it was different from the mass-produced monsters. It didn't fall into a fanatical state where it didn't fear death. In other words, it could still use its brain. This could be seen from the fact that Musu Maf wanted to attack Fimbaba from the ground. However, Fimbaba was unmoved. It was just a mere Musu Maf, who was lucky enough to avoid its vines underground. It was simply not enough to be mentioned in the same breath as Fimbaba. It must be known that Fimbaba was comparable to the heavenly bull Gugalana. Even if it was facing the real Tiamat, the real Fimbaba could contend against it, let alone a mere Musu Maf. In Fimbaba's view, at the very least, it should let Gorgon, who had Tiamat's authority, be its opponent. Just as Fimbaba thought, Musu Maf, who had sneaked into the ground to prepare another sneak attack, was found and entangled by the vines that Fimbaba had arranged underground. The struggling Musu Maf drilled out from the ground. There were several injuries on its body. It seemed that it had suffered a big loss from Fimbaba. At this time, Gorgon couldn't stand it anymore. Monsters attacked the north wall. Chapter 977. Gorgon ordered again. She told the magical beasts to ignore Fimbaba and attack the north wall. Fimbaba was just a clown to her. The only thing that mattered was to break through the north wall. Roar! The magical beasts chose to ignore Fimbaba. After roaring a few times, they all rushed toward the vine barrier created by Fimbaba. Even though Fimbaba was still killing the magical beasts, it still couldn't stop the magical beasts from attacking the vine barrier. The vine barrier was disappearing at a speed visible to the naked eye. This made Leonidas, Nuwakamaru, and Musasobo Benkei, who were killing the magical beasts from the gaps in the vine barrier, quite nervous. Damn it, we can't kill them all. Nuwakamaru couldn't help but blurt out in annoyance. After all, there were too many magical beasts. Even if Fimbaba could create vines, it wouldn't be able to kill all of them in a short time. Fimbaba had been preparing for the vine barrier for a short period of time. If it wanted to create enough vines to kill so many magical beasts, it would take a while for it to prepare. At the moment, whether it was Nuwakamaru, Leonidas, or Musasobo Benkei, they didn't have a good way to deal with the current situation. Since the vine barrier can't stop the magical beasts, we can only change the method. Leonidas suddenly said. Then he looked at Nuwakamaru. General Nuwakamaru, I have a request. Leonidas said something to Nuwakamaru. Nuwakamaru was stunned for a moment. Even Musasobo Benkei was stunned for a moment. It seems this poor monk was too focused on the battlefield. I actually forgot about this matter. Musasobo Benkei shook his head in self-mockery. But the situation was urgent, so it wasn't the time to chat. Then I'll go. After Nyo Rowan finished speaking, he immediately ran towards the north wall, as if he was flying. Only Nyo Rowan and Leonidas were left to continue slaughtering the magical beasts. As for Fimbaba, while Fimbaba was hesitating, the sound of chains could be heard. A large number of silver-white chains bound Fimbaba's body, preventing it from slaughtering the magical beasts. Walala! Fimbaba looked up. It was Enkidu. No, it was the fake Enkidu. Fimbaba had seen this guy before, so he wasn't unfamiliar with him. Fimbaba just didn't know who the other party was. Just a mere beast, behave yourself. Kinga's expression was cold, and the heaven lock that emerged from the ripples around him tightened its grip on Fimbaba. However, Fimbaba wasn't a god. The heaven lock was just a very strong chain to it. It could easily break free with brute force or skill, such as now. New vines appeared on the ground around Fimbaba. These vines didn't attack the magical beasts that were passing by. Instead, they stretched between the heaven lock and Fimbaba, slowly expanding the heaven lock that bound Fimbaba. Fimbaba easily jumped out of it. Walala. After Fimbaba broke free, Kingu subconsciously released the heaven lock. The heaven lock turned into golden light and dissipated with the sound of chains. Sure enough, the heaven lock doesn't have much effect on a beast like you. Kingu wasn't surprised by this result. Whether it was himself or Fimbaba, he knew that if they really fought, he might not be able to subdue this mythical beast that was stronger than a bull. It was also because of this self-awareness that Kinga's task wasn't to kill or trap Fimbaba. His task was only to distract Fimbaba and provide cover for others. Rumble. The ground under Fimbaba's feet suddenly shattered. A large amount of land fell into a pitch-black abyss. and the area was so large that almost 1/6 of the magical beasts suffered this disaster. Funbaba stepped on the vines that grew out of the ground that hadn't completely collapsed, trying to use them as stepping stones to escape. However, a huge snake tail that was about the same size as Funbaba suddenly stretched out and pulled Funbaba into the ground. If someone paid attention to Gorgon, they would find that Gorgon had disappeared at some point. It was obvious that the collapse of the ground was caused by Gorgon. Ignoring the large-scale collapse of the ground, Kinga knew that Funbaba had been dragged into the ground by Gorgon, and Kinga was providing cover for Gorgon. Funbaba was comparable to a bull, and only Gorgon could defeat it. However, Kinga didn't expect that Gorgon would choose to drag Funbaba into the ground. This wasn't a good thing. After all, other than Gorgon, there was another big enemy that was about to arrive. Silver Meteor. Following the release of a powerful noble phantasm, a bright white beam of light with a hint of gold instantly shot from one end of the vine barrier to the other end of the vine barrier in front of the north wall. All the magical beasts that were within a few dozen meters of the vine barrier were all enveloped by this beam of light. Obviously, these magical beasts were as dead as they could be. After all, this was the so-called light cannon. How could the mass-produced magical beasts withstand it? Jingu dared to conclude that this light cannon must have killed more than half of the magical beasts. In addition to the magical beasts that had fallen into the abyss after being attacked indiscriminately by Gorgon, the remaining magical beasts could be said to be the only ones left, who asked the magical beasts to listen to Gorgon's orders and collectively attack the vine barrier. Their gathering together was advantageous for the other party to release his noble phantasm. Among the magical beasts that were affected, only one of the magical beast commanders, Musumafu, survived. Even so, 5 of its heads were broken. One of the remaining 2 heads drooped down and was basically dead. The other head, which was the last one, was also bleeding profusely. It seemed like Musumafu didn't have the ability to regenerate its snake heads like Gorgon did. Otherwise, it would have been suppressed. I didn't expect that man to have such a powerful anti-city noble phantasm. Kinga was naturally referring to Wuming, but Kinga was wrong. Normally, light cannons were considered anti-city noble phantasms unless they had special effects. However, Wuming's noble phantasm, Silver Meteor, was an anti-evil noble phantasm that he obtained from the suppression force. It wasn't an anti-city noble phantasm. Silver Meteor was only released in the form of a light cannon. Magical beasts could be said to be evil to humans, so naturally, they were also evil to Wuming, who was the guardian of humans. However, even if the other party wasn't evil, with the characteristics of Wuming's noble phantasm, he could forcefully add an evil attribute to the magical beasts. It was just that the magical beasts themselves didn't require Wuming to do so. However, Wuming still felt that this was too much of a coincidence. Chapter 978. This was also the reason why one of the surviving demonic beast commanders, Musumafu, was in such a miserable state. If it weren't for the fact that there were too many demonic beasts, which helped Musumafu block a portion of the attack, Wuming's attack could have easily killed Musumafu. Silently shaking his head, Kinga wanted to give up on these demonic beasts. Anyway, his mother and the new humans were not harmed. As long as his mother came out, this world would be over. No one could stop his mother. Even that man, in Kinga's opinion, could not stop his mother from destroying Mesopotamia and cleansing the human race. After thinking about this, Kinga focused his eyes and looked in Wuming's direction. His mother was a great enemy, so he had to pay attention to her movements. Moreover, he was so far away, so he shouldn't be affected. With Enkidu's powerful eyesight, Kinga easily saw Wuming in the distance, who was holding a broken lightsaber. Ugh. This made Kinga feel a headache again, and he couldn't help but groan. This made Kinga shocked. He was shocked because he still couldn't get used to facing that man, and the situation seemed to be getting worse. At this moment, Gorgon had run underground. This was really bad. In the distance, Wuming removed Meteor Silver's noble phantasm liberation, and gathered the broken lightsaber in his right hand, turning the broken lightsaber back into a bright silver knight's sword. After Wuming killed Bashyomu, and used the divine blade of salvation to clean up the poison in the surroundings. He must have rushed over from the north wall without stopping. However, because Wu Ming had already sensed Finbaba's aura at the north wall, he was not in a hurry. Therefore, Wu Ming hid himself and went around to the inconspicuous edge of the north wall, ready to act according to the situation. After all, no matter when, the enemy is in the open while I'm in the dark, was quite advantageous. Coincidentally, Gorgon made the demonic beasts ignore Finbaba and attack the vine barrier instead. This gave Wu Ming an opportunity. When the demonic beasts rushed up to attack the vine barrier, Wu Ming directly took out the meteor silver that had accompanied him for a long time, and directly released its evil noble phantasm, successfully killing most of the demonic beasts. The reason why Wu Ming did not use the divine blade of salvation was entirely because in the current situation, meteor silver was more useful than the divine blade of salvation, and also because it had been a long time since Wu Ming had meteor silver. Although it was a noble phantasm's noble phantasm, it was a noble phantasm had accompanied Wu Ming was a noble phantasm of salvation. Wu Ming opened the dragon lair and put away the meteor silver. Then he raised himself up and took in the entire north wall. After being affected by Gorgon's attack and being blasted down by Wu Ming's light cannon, the demons attacking the northern wall were almost completely wiped out. At most, there was only a sixth of their original numbers left, and a half-crippled demonic commander. However, even if there were only these demonic beasts left, the number of demonic beasts was still considerable, at least to the humans. However, Wu Ming had already helped them a lot, and it was impossible for him to continue helping them. After all, if the humans were to completely rely on God, Gilgamesh's will of separation between man and God would probably die directly. Therefore, the remaining demonic beasts could only be eliminated by the humans themselves. In addition, Wu Ming had a more important point. Wu Ming saw the fake Enkidu that seemed to be Kingu. Wu Ming had a feeling that the other party must be an extraordinary existence in this singularity. Perhaps the other party was hiding some secrets that Wu Ming did not know about, such as Tiamat. Wu Ming immediately flew towards Enkidu. When Enkidu noticed Wu Ming coming over, he immediately dived into the bottomless abyss that was opened up by Gorgon. Wu Ming stopped above the bottomless abyss, then glanced at Leonidas and Musasobo Benkei, who were protected by vines. After nodding to the two of them, Wu Ming did not hesitate and dived into the abyss. "Let's go, Mr. Bianqing. This place will be broken soon. We should retreat." The vine barrier was consumed by the previous magical beasts. It was estimated that it would not last long. If they continued to stay, then they would be swallowed up by the remaining magical beasts. As they understood before, even if the number of magical beasts was consumed, the number of magical beasts would still pose a threat to humans. However, they could rely on the north wall to deal with the current number of beasts. Silent understood this point. That's why he gave Leonidas the task of dealing with the beasts outside the north wall. That's why he nodded to Leonidas earlier. Leonidas and Musasobo Benkei saw that sporadic magical beasts had entered through the gap in the vine barrier. They immediately returned to the north wall. Wu Ming couldn't help but frown as he went deeper into the abyss created by Gorgon's destruction. He had not reached the bottom yet. Did Gorgon directly penetrate the underworld when he destroyed the underground? Wu Ming couldn't help but ask. It wasn't Wu Ming's fault. After all, the deeper they went, the colder it got. The surrounding rocks gradually became similar to the underworld. But if that was the case, then Wu Ming had doubts. Why did Ereshkigal move the underworld here? There weren't many underworld that followed Ereshkigal to the Mesopotamia. Most of the land was centered around Kuza city. Although Ereshkigal could move the underworld, but there was no need to move the underworld outside the north wall. It was too strange. The deeper Wu Ming went, the more he felt that this was indeed the underworld. Because he saw the spear cages inserted into the ground. There were still sporadic garrulous spirits. It's a little troublesome. Although Wu Ming guessed that Ereshkigal was on the side of the humans, but she used the same method as the Quetzalcoatl to cause her to stand on the opposite side of the humans. But for now, Ereshkigal was still a member of the Three Goddesses Alliance. Gorgon and Finbaba broke in, plus Kingu who escaped Wu Ming into the underworld. and Wuming who chased after Kingu. With so many extraordinary beings breaking into the underworld, Ereshkigal was bound to be dissatisfied. These beings who entered the underworld could be regarded as Ereshkigal's enemies. Even if Ereshkigal's temper was good, she was still the queen who controlled the underworld. More importantly, Gorgon brought people to attack the underworld. Ereshkigal might be angry because of this. Just like now. Boom! You're tuning in to the Echoes of the Heart YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.